I stood at the back of the county hall, the air heavy with applause, as banners praised Colonel Nathan Kerrigan. Tonight the town would call him a hero, a man who carried honor like a metal pin to his chest. But in my hands I carried a worn leather folder, and inside it were pages that told another story. The man they were about to honor was the same man who had signed off on the faulty armor that tore my unit apart. They were ready to give him a bridge, a plaque, a legacy carved in bronze. I was ready to remind them of the names carved in stone. Before we step into the heart of this story, I ask you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if stories of courage and resilience speak to you. Share in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Every note you leave reminds me how far these stories can travel and how many lives they might touch. If you know someone who has worn the uniform or someone who has loved a veteran, consider passing this story on. Sometimes sharing the truth is the only way it finds the light. My name is Mara Quinn. I served as a warrant officer in military intelligence. After years in the desert and the shadows, I came home carrying the silence of graves and the weight of unanswered questions. Colonel Kerrigan was once my commanding officer. He even saved my life once. And I will never forget that. But in the quiet of my mother's attic, I found the records of a charity called Valor Steps. Numbers do not lie, and those numbers point straight to the truth I can no longer bury. The attic still held the breath of winter, pine dust and old paper. A thin shaft of light slid through the gable vent and laid a bright stripe across the rafters like rank on a sleeve. I set the brass compass on a joist where the light could find it. The lid clicked shut with a small crisp sound I had known since childhood. Mother had carried that compass in a pocket of her garden jacket. She said it kept her from getting lost in grief the year my father left, when she died. The house felt clean and finished. The attic felt like a held breath. I was not searching for ghosts. I was sorting donations for the church sale. In the last crate, beneath a box of Christmas ribbon and a bundle of hand-knit scarves, I found a hardback book with cracked red leather. It was the kind of ledger you see in black and white photographs, heavier than it looked. The first page listed dates and amounts in a tidy hand I recognized. Aunt Ruth, who had been treasurer for half the town at one time or another. At the top, she had written Valor Steps. I felt a small chill at that name. It was the charity Colonel Kerrigan ran, the man the county wanted to honor with a bridge, the man who had once pulled me out from under falling stone and told me to breathe. The entries were clean: date, amount, donor name where allowed, then a second column that did not look like donations. It looked like movement. A transfer to an entity called Red Cedar, another to a line item labeled safety training, another to a consultancy fee. Each entry sat in the ledger like a polite guest, nothing messy, nothing crossed out. I turned a few more pages and found a cluster of dates that made my skin feel too tight. Those days bracketed the mission where Tara died. I ran my thumb along the paper edge and felt the tiny burrs. The ledger did not say guilt. The ledger said fact. I carried the book to the window and set it next to the compass. North held steady. I tried to breathe like I had taught young soldiers to breathe after bad nights. In through the nose, out slow, count the ribs, count again. I took a photograph of the pages with my phone, then another with the attic light turned, then another with the flashlight for a clean angle. Old habits, triple coverage. I should have called the county clerk or a reporter or an attorney. I called Serena instead. Serena answered on the second ring. I could hear a coffee grinder and a dog bark and the soft hush people use in clinics. She worked days at the community health center and nights on call for the VA mobile unit. She had kept our platoon stitched together with hands that never shook. When we first met, I asked how she did that. She said this: "I do not borrow tomorrow. I mend the piece in front of me." I told her I had found a ledger from Valor Steps. I told her the transfers did not look like what a local charity should be moving. I told her the dates and the name Red Cedar. She did not interrupt. Serena let silence do its work. Then she said she could swing by after clinic with coffee. She asked if I needed food. I told her I had leftover stew. She laughed the way you laugh when someone finally speaks your language again. I went downstairs and set the kettle on. The house had that stillness of late afternoon when the sun slides behind fir trees and the temperature drops a degree you can feel in your bones. The compass on the counter looked like a small moon. I wiped it with a dish towel and set it on a folded napkin. Old training came back so easily. Clear your space, lay out your tools, prepare for contact. Serena arrived with 2 cups and a cardboard caddy and a bag of sweet rolls she swore were not as sinful as they smelled. She stood in the doorway and took me in with a medic's eye. She always looked for color first, then breathing, then the hands. She hugged me, then held me at arm's length and nodded like a coach who approves of a game plan. I put the ledger between us on the table. I told her I needed her to look at a wound and tell me if it bled. She slid the ledger toward her and turned the pages with her fingertips. She hummed under her breath, a habit from the tents when she focused on stitching. I watched her face more than I watched her hands. She paused over the cluster of dates that had stopped me. She put a tiny dot in the margin with my pencil. Then she traced a line across the page that connected a donation to a transfer to an invoice number. Her voice stayed low. If these numbers are true, then this is not only bleeding, it is bleeding straight into someone's pocket. I felt my jaw set the way it used to before a briefing. I told her about Tara's helmet, about the hole that should not have been there, about the report that said the plate failed on impact. Serena had stood beside me when we received the news. She had pressed a cloth into my hand and told me to breathe. She closed the ledger now and sat back. "We are going to need more than a ledger," she said. "Numbers are bones. We need tissue. We need the chain that shows how money moved and why. And we will need a place to take it that is not a rumor mill." I nodded. She was right. You can aim at a feeling and miss by a mile. You aim at a timeline and you either hit or you do not. I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank document. I typed a heading that said chain. Serena read the donor names aloud and I typed them. She read the transfer dates and I typed them. She read the invoice numbers and I typed them and left space after each for document I did not yet have. At the bottom of the page, I wrote a single word, FOIA. I said it out loud so my voice would own it. The Freedom of Information Act had never felt like freedom to me. It felt like a door with 3 locks, but sometimes 3 locks are better. It means what is inside matters. We ate stew. Serena told me about a Vietnam vet who came to the clinic every Thursday with a bag of tomatoes for the nurses. He said tomatoes taste like courage when you salt them in the sun. I told her about a kid at the hardware store who carried the boxes to my truck and asked if I was the lady who ran in the mornings. He said my stride looked like I was trying to outrun something and asked if I needed new laces. We laughed. We let the house warm up with old stories. Then we went back to work. We made a plan. I would file a FOIA request for procurement records tied to Red Cedar and to training invoices paid to any safety consultant over a 5-year window. Serena would ask a friend at the VA benefits office how to request a basic verification of nonprofit status and filings for Valor steps. We would not accuse anyone. We would ask for paper. Serena lifted the compass lid and watched the needle settle. She said that some tools are simple because the world is honest in one direction. She slid the compass toward me and said to keep it close. Then she squeezed my shoulder and told me to sleep. She knew I would not. She knew I would try. When she left, the house absorbed the quiet like a field after rain. I washed the bowls and dried them and put them upside down on the rack like my mother taught me. Then I carried the ledger back to the attic and returned it to the crate where I had found it. I am not sentimental about evidence. I prefer photographs and copies. I did not want the original walking around the house where grief could find it. I slept 2 hours and woke to the sound of crows. Dawn in this town arrives like an old friend who has learned to knock instead of barge in. I brewed coffee and wrote the FOIA request in plain language. I wrote it the way I wrote field notes when lives depended on clarity. No adjectives, no opinions, dates, vendors, contract numbers, delivery logs. I sent it and felt that small drop in the chest that happens after you fire and before you hear the round strike. Then I laced my shoes and ran until the river met me. On the trail, I counted paces and thought of Tara's boy. Luke would be nearly grown now. He had freckles across his nose like salt on a table. He used to ask if the stars over Afghanistan were louder than the stars here. I told him stars make no sound and asked why he thought they might. He said because soldiers look up at them more often. I promised him I would send a map of the constellations we could both see. Then the world broke. I never mailed that map. The guilt sits in me like a small stone I carry from pocket to pocket. When I came home, the FOIA portal showed a confirmation number and a time frame that felt like a shrug. Weeks, maybe months. The truth is often slow. I made a list of what could move faster. I texted Serena and asked if she knew anyone who had worked with red cedar. She sent a single name, Marla Voss, engineer. She added that Marla had left the company last year and had a reputation for speaking her mind at inconvenient times. My kind of person, Serena wrote. I found Marla on a professional networking site and sent a short message that explained I was a retired warrant officer looking into non-profit procurement patterns in a small county. I did not use words like fraud. I asked if she would be willing to talk about quality control protocols on legacy products. I attached nothing. People answer people. They do not answer files. I walked to the church thrift room with a box of linens and a bag of mother's books that she would have wanted read. The lady at the table wore a cardigan the color of mint tea and smiled like she had known my birth weight. She asked after Aunt Ruth and told me how faithful she had been with the charity books. She said the county was lucky to have men like Colonel Kerrigan who kept voters focused on the flag. I smiled and thanked her for the work she did. You do not change a mind with a fact delivered like a slap. You set a table. You invite the fact to sit. That night Serena texted. She had talked to a benefits officer who pointed her to the state charity registry. We could request annual filings and board rosters. We could see conflicts if there were any. She said she would stop by on her day off with more coffee and something green to put in my refrigerator so I did not live on stew. I told her I had apples and peanut butter. She told me that did not count, and I replied that in a pinch it did. I slept a little better. The kind of sleep where you can feel your body set down a bag for an hour. In the morning, the compass looked less like an heirloom and more like a tool again. North had not moved. My job was to build a path that fit it. The state registry website was not friendly, but it was honest. I found Valor Steps in a list between a youth soccer league and a horse rescue. The filings showed donors and broad categories for spending. The language was polite and hopeful. Support for returning veterans and their families, training, community events. A small stipend program for emergency needs. I did not see Red Cedar listed. Charities do not list vendors by name in public summaries. They list outcomes. I wrote down the total amounts for the 2 years that mattered most to Tara's timeline. I circled a rise in the line called training. It could be innocent. It could be a class in back safety at the mill. It could be anything. That is the trouble with summaries. They are stories told in a kind voice. I called the number on the charity page and asked when the next public meeting would be held. The woman who answered sounded busy and kind. She said the board met quarterly. The next session would be a short update at the county hall ahead of the bridge ceremony. I thanked her and said I would bring cookies. She laughed and said cookies are how this town negotiates. Serena came by after clinic with iced coffees sweating through their lids and a small container of spinach salad. She insisted I eat before anything else. She read the state filings over my shoulder and tapped a nail on the training line. She said the clinic runs on grants and donations and how easy it is to file something as training when it is something else entirely, not always malicious, sometimes sloppy bookkeeping. Sometimes someone calls a retreat training because it feels better to write it that way. We both knew sloppy was not what I was looking at. The ledger entries were too clean for sloppy. That kind of neat belongs to people who believe neatness is virtue. Serena put her hand on my wrist and asked me to breathe. Then she said we needed an outside timeline, something that would either disprove my worry or prove it. She suggested we speak to Luke before someone else did. He was old enough now to have opinions that belonged to him. I called the wood shop where he worked. The owner said he was on a delivery and left a number with a name I recognized from high school football games. I left a careful message that said I was an old friend of his mother and that I would like to bring him coffee and talk if he had time. He called back an hour later. His voice had the hollow between boy and man. He said he knew who I was and that he could meet me at the river after his shift. He said the river is where he goes when he wants to think about his mother without someone asking him how he is doing. We met at the bend where the water slows before it takes on speed again. He wore a plain t-shirt and a cap with a logging company logo. His face was Tara's face in softer lines. He sat on the bank with his hands flat on the ground like he needed to feel the earth to be steady. He told me he had tried to join the Marines when he turned 18 and that Serena had talked him into waiting a year. He said he was glad she had. He said he was not sure he was built for orders, but he was drawn to men who keep them. I asked if he had any of his mother's things. He nodded and pulled a worn helmet liner from his pack. He said he kept it because it was what touched her hair. The outer shell had been taken as evidence and never returned. He said he had placed a penny on her headstone on his 12th birthday because he wanted to give her something that felt like a promise. He turned the liner in his hands and said he sometimes slept with it under his pillow when he wanted to dream without faces. He handed it to me and asked me to keep it for a while if that would help. I told him only if he wanted me to, and that I would return it the moment he asked. I told him I was looking at numbers. I told him numbers are not the whole story, but they point to chapters. I asked if anyone had pressured him to attend the bridge ceremony. He said Aunt Ruth had asked kindly and he had said maybe and then changed the subject. He said he did not know what to do with the idea of a bridge that carried the name of a man he was told to thank. He said gratitude without trust feels like kneeling on gravel. I promised not to draw him into a public storm. I told him I would carry the weight of proof and the weight of the room if it came to that. He looked at the water as if it could answer for me. Then he said he might stand at the back, not to shout, to witness. He said witnesses are how history decides who to believe later. When I got home, there was an email in my inbox from a simple address. No photo. No signature line. It contained 2 scans of invoices labeled safety services. The amounts matched the ledger entries within a few dollars. The dates overlapped my notes. The payee was a shell outfit registered in a neighboring state. I recognized the secretary name on the filing. She had married my cousin the year after I deployed. The email had no subject line. The only text said check the time stamp on delivery. I sent the scans to a free metadata tool and confirmed the creation time. The files had been generated the morning before the ledger showed the board approved the expense. That could mean backdating, it could mean batch processing, or it could mean the decision had been made by someone before the board met. Board members are volunteers. They trust the packet in front of them. It is a kindness that can be weaponized. I called Serena and read her the metadata times. She did not swear. She never swore. She said this will likely get worse before it gets better. Then she said that we would need to protect Aunt Ruth. That mattered to me in a way I had not let myself feel yet. Family can be wrong while still loving you. It is a kind of ache that does not respond to medicine. That night I wrote a list of rules for myself. No public accusation until a neutral auditor can verify. No corners cut on chain of custody. No argument with anyone at the store or the post office. Always let Serena or Denise sit behind me at public meetings. Eat something green each day. Sleep when the house allows it. Pray in my mother's kitchen, even if the prayer is only a hand on the table. The next morning I drove to the county clerk to ask about the schedule for the public comment period. On the way I passed the bridge that still bore its simple name, Maple Bridge. The river flashed up sunlight where it hit the pylons. I thought of the phrase, hold fast. Sailors used to tattoo it on their knuckles. It was not poetry. It was a reminder. There are moments when you grip the line so the ship does not swing into the rocks. You do it with your whole body. You do it for everyone aboard. At the clerk's office, I signed the list and took a seat. Kerrigan walked in a few minutes later with 2 men I recognized from the Chamber of Commerce breakfasts. He saw me and nodded politely. There was no heat in his eyes, only an old weight that men wear when they believe the town owes them courtesy. He sat near the front and spoke with the clerk about the order of events for the ceremony. His voice carried that soft command that makes people lean in. He had earned it once. Perhaps he had worn it too long. As I left, he called my name. He asked if I had settled back into town. He said he had a seat saved for me at the ceremony if I wanted it. He said my service had mattered and that public thanks is part of how we heal. I told him I preferred the back of rooms. He smiled and said he understood. He had always known I worked better near exits. His words landed with that familiar mix of respect and ownership. He looked at my hands then. He saw the red leather corner sticking out of my bag, the ledger. His eyes changed by a degree only someone who had watched him intense would notice. It was not fear. It was calculation. Be careful, he said. Some truths hurt people we love. I let the words sit between us. Then I told him I had learned on deployment that the truth already hurt the people I love. That is why I served. It is also why I was standing here now. In the parking lot, I sat in the truck and let the wheel take my weight. I felt the pulse in my wrists and counted until it slowed. I called Denise and told her everything I had said and everything he had said. She told me to write it down while it was fresh. I did. Then I drove to the river and walked until my breath found its rhythm again. When I returned home, there was a reply from Marla Voss. She agreed to a call after work. She wrote that she did not traffic in gossip. She wrote that she cared about quality control because quality control keeps children from growing up without parents. She asked if I could keep her name out of county chatter. I promised I would. I set the compass on the table and watched the needle settle as the kettle began to sing. The house felt ready. The story did not. Stories never do. They enter the room with their shoes still wet from whatever storm raised them. You hand them a towel, you sit them down, you listen until they stop shivering. I took a breath and pressed call. The FOIA packet arrived on a Tuesday morning in an envelope so ordinary that it could have been a bank statement or a credit card offer. The government seal sat in the corner, flat and gray. My chest tightened as I carried it inside. I had been a soldier long enough to know that the quiet envelopes are the ones that change you. The loud ones, orders stamped in red, warnings printed bold, those you can brace for. The quiet ones arrive like a whisper and split you open. I sat at the kitchen table with the compass next to me and a mug of coffee cooling by my hand. I opened the envelope with the precision of a field knife. Inside, there was no explanation, just a stack of copied pages, each smothered in black rectangles. Whole paragraphs gone, names gone, signatures blotted out like a storm cloud swallowing a skyline. I had been trained to read patterns more than words. In Afghanistan, half the intelligence we worked with came blurred, shredded. Or coded, you learn to read what remains, to sense the shape of the hidden thing by its shadow. Still, as I flipped through, the anger rose. These were supposed to be procurement records. Instead, they looked like censored poems. A single line of vendor numbers here, an unredacted date there, then long black walls where the truth should have lived. I called Serena. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice carried the steady warmth of a medic who has seen enough blood to know panic changes nothing. I told her the envelope had come and that most of it was gone under ink. She said she was between patients, that she would swing by after clinic. Bring your patience, I warned her. She laughed softly. Patience is what I give away every day, Mara. Save me a cup of coffee and I will bring what is left. By afternoon, she was sitting across from me at the table, hair tied back, scrub top, smelling faintly of antiseptic. She flipped through the stacks slowly, her lips pursed. I watched her eyes pause at a date, a line item, a code half visible. She tapped a fingernail on the page, then leaned back. This is not a wound we can stitch in the kitchen, she said. We need a different set of hands. I frowned. Whose hands? Denise Carter, she answered. You remember her. Military Police, Oak Ridge Detachment. She is with the county sheriff's office now, sharp as ever. She knows the language of reports and what a courtroom will throw out. I had not seen Denise in years. Last memory of her was in the green desert light, standing at the perimeter with her weapons slung, jaw set like iron. She had been the one who calmed rowdy contractors and scared off thieves who thought they could lift gear from our supply lines. She carried rules the way some carried rifles. I hesitated. Denise had always been straight as a plumb line. If she thought we were wandering into rumor, she would shut us down. Serena read my face the way she read vital signs. Mara. She said gently, you do not have to fight every battle alone. Let us share the line. So we made a plan. We would meet Denise not in an office, not under fluorescent lights, but in a place that belonged to memory as much as to the present. The diner off Route 7, with chipped formica tables and pie that tasted like somebody's grandmother still baked it at home. A neutral ground where small talk and serious talk lived side by side. That evening, I sat with the compass in my palm and tried to recall Denise's voice. Sharp, measured, always certain of the difference between what she knew and what she suspected. She had been the one to tell Tara once, better to write down too much than too little. Paper does not lie if you let it speak. That memory was like a hand on my back now, pushing me forward. The next day, the three of us slid into a booth at the diner, the kind with red vinyl seats that creaked when you leaned back. Serena placed the packet on the table between us. Denise ordered coffee black and waited until the waitress left before touching the papers. She read in silence, lips pressed thin. The minutes stretched. Outside, trucks rumbled past on the highway. Inside, the ceiling fan hummed a slow circle. Finally, Denise set the papers down and met my eyes. You know, I cannot officially be part of this, she said. If this ever ends up in front of a judge, chain of custody and bias will matter. But she tapped the stack. If you want me to tell you what holes a prosecutor will see, I can do that. That was all I needed. I did not ask her to carry a rifle, only to show me the map. I do not need you to fire a shot, I told her. I just need you to point me in the right direction. Serena reached across the table and drew her finger along one of the black lines. We used to patch holes in body armor, she said softly. Now we are patching holes in paper, different material, same principle. You fill the gaps until it holds. We sat there like a squad once more, not in sand and dust this time, but in the dim glow of a roadside diner. 3 women who had carried weight in different ways now carrying this. Denise began pointing out weaknesses. The FOIA response was too redacted to be useful alone. We needed corroboration, independent records, supplier logs, testimonies from anyone who handled the gear. She said timelines mattered more than suspicions. If we could show that money moved before decisions were made or that equipment failed in a pattern, that would be a line even a judge would have to see. She scribbled on a napkin. Not dates alone, she said. Sequence. What happened first? What followed? That is how you prove negligence or worse. Without sequence, it is just grief shouting at a wall. I nodded. My grief had shouted at walls long enough. When the waitress came with refills, we shifted the papers into a neat pile and smiled like 3 women catching up on old stories. That was its own kind of cover. No one gives a second glance to veterans reminiscing. We wear our camouflage in plain sight now. After Denise left, Serena and I lingered over pie. She watched me with that look she used in triage when deciding if someone could make the walk to the aid station or needed to be carried. You are steadier than you think, she said. But steady is not the same as whole. I wanted to tell her I had not felt whole since the day Tara's body came home under a flag, but I swallowed the words. Some truths lie better inside until they can be set free without breaking you. That night back at the house, I laid the red ledger and the blacked-out FOIA pages side by side on the table. Red leather, black ink. Between them was the space where truth should stand. I traced the dates with my finger, connecting lines no one had meant me to see. I thought of Kerrigan, the way his eyes had flicked to the corner of the ledger when he saw it in my bag. He knew, he had always known. The question now was whether the town would ever believe me over him. The compass needle pointed north. My task was simple in principle, impossible in practice. Fill the gaps, hold the line, build a sequence that could not be ignored. The diner meeting with Denise left me both steadier and unsettled. She had given me the rules of engagement, the legal terrain. Proof demanded sequence. Dates alone were bones, but bones needed tendons to move. That night I spread the blacked-out FOIA pages across my kitchen table and felt the same old itch I had known in the desert tents. You could be staring at fragments for weeks before one small line lit the whole thing. The following morning I called Serena. Her voice was tired but calm. She said she had arranged a short coffee with Denise before patrol duty. I joined them at a park bench near the sheriff's substation. Denise handed me a list she had scribbled in her compact block handwriting. Local suppliers, warehouse managers, contract officers whose names were only half visible under the redactions. She told me to build my timeline outward, like stitching a wound from the clean edge to the dirty one. We do not need every detail, she said. We need the outline strong enough that the missing pieces are obvious. Judges understand outlines, juries understand stories. I nodded. That was what I could build, a story built from paper, not imagination. 2 days later, I got a call from Luke. His voice sounded older than the last time. He asked if I could meet him at the shop after work. I drove there at dusk, the air heavy with sawdust and summer insects. He stepped outside carrying a cloth bundle under his arm. He unwrapped it on the hood of my truck. Inside lay the dented helmet liner he had shown me at the river, and this time a penny rested in the fold. The copper had darkened with years, edges worn smooth. I placed my hand on the metal, felt the roughness where it had torn. That hole had lived in my nightmares. Tara's laughter still echoed in my head, that bright, fearless sound silenced by a plate that should have held. Luke looked at me jaw tight. This was hers, he said, and this penny was mine. I put it on her grave the year I turned 12. I wanted her to have something from me, even if it was small. I asked why he was showing me now. He shifted on his feet, looked out toward the road. I heard people talking after church, he said, about the bridge, about Colonel Kerrigan. They said he was the reason the town still had jobs, the reason the quarries kept running. I wanted to believe them, but then I remembered what you told me, that the numbers point to something else. He pressed the penny into my hand. If you are going to tell this story, he said, then you should carry it. The coin felt heavier than it should, not in weight but in meaning. I promised him I would keep it safe until the day came to set it down in the open. Back home, I laid the helmet liner, penny, red ledger, and blacked out FOIA pages side by side, artifacts of grief, evidence of truth. I photographed them the way crime scene texts do, ruler beside each object, time-stamped. If anyone accused me later, I wanted a record that these things had existed, that they had been mine to carry. That night, Serena dropped by after clinic. She stood over the table, eyes moving from the penny to the helmet liner. She placed her hand gently on both, like blessing them. Then she said, "We are getting closer, Mara, and closer means more dangerous." Danger did not scare me. What scared me was silence. That was why I answered every unknown number that rang my phone. One of those calls could be the line that pulled the whole story together. The email came not as a call, but as a ping on my laptop after midnight. No subject line, no sender name I recognized, just an attachment labeled invoice. I stared at it, heart racing. The instinct to delete was strong, but I had lived too many years decoding messages from strangers. I downloaded it to a clean folder, scanned it with the basic security I had. It opened into a PDF of 2 invoices. Both bore the name of a consulting firm registered out of state. Both matched the transfer dates Serena and I had marked in the ledger. And both carried a small, damning detail. They had been created a full day before the Board of Valor Steps had officially approved them. I printed them and laid them next to the ledger. The sequence glared back at me. First, money marked as donation. Next, transfer to the shell firm. Finally, board minutes that had been written after the fact to bless what was already done. The email had only one line in the body. Check the timestamps. I checked. Metadata confirmed it. The files had been generated on a Tuesday morning. The board had met Wednesday evening. Serena came by at dawn. I showed her the printouts, my finger tapping the dates like a drumbeat. She let out a long breath. "This is not sloppy," she whispered. "This is deliberate." We sat in silence, the compass between us on the table, its needle steady as if mocking the storm around us. I thought of Kerrigan, of the look in his eyes when he saw the ledger corner peeking from my bag. He had known this storm would come one day. He had built walls to hold it back. Now we had found the cracks. Later that day we met Denise again, this time at the diner. I slid the invoices across to her. She studied them, jaw tightening. "If these are real," she said slowly, "then it is fraud, plain and simple, but provenance matters. Who sent them to you? Can you prove chain of custody?" I shook my head. An anonymous email, no signature, just the files. Denise sighed. "Without a known source, a defense attorney will shred it, but combined with the ledger, with witness testimony, it can still point investigators where they need to look. Think of it as a flare, not a bullet." Serena leaned forward. "Then we fire the flare and make sure someone sees it." I looked at both of them. 2 women who had stood beside me in deserts and clinics, now beside me in this quieter war. A sisterhood built not from blood but from the shared weight of service. Together we had begun to stitch the holes in the armor of lies. That night I placed the penny in the compass case and snapped it shut. Luke had given it as a promise, and I would carry it as one. A copper coin, a brass compass, red leather, black ink. Ordinary objects turned into weapons of truth. I whispered to the empty room what I had once whispered to my squad before a long patrol. "Hold fast. Do not break. We walk this line together." The morning of the county hearing smelled like rain even though the sky was dry. I woke before dawn, the compass cold in my hand where I had fallen asleep clutching it. On the kitchen table lay the red ledger, the blacked-out FOIA pages, the printouts of the anonymous invoices, proof in fragments, a story half-written. I made coffee, poured it into a thermos, and sat in the silence of the house until the clock struck 7. Serena pulled into the driveway first. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, her hair braided back the way she used to keep it under her helmet. She carried 2 paper cups and handed one to me. Her eyes searched mine the way a medic checks a wound before touching it. "You ready?" she asked softly. "Ready is not what I feel," I admitted, "but I am steady." Denise arrived a few minutes later in her patrol car, though she was off duty. She stepped out in plain clothes, blazer neat, boots polished. Her presence carried the weight of authority even without a badge showing. She shook my hand, then gripped my shoulder. "You know the rules," she said. "State the facts, anchor yourself in sequence, and when he tries to twist the air, you breathe." We drove together to the county hall, the 3 of us like a small squad heading into a mission. The building was old brick, its walls lined with portraits of men in suits who had believed they were guiding the town into the future. Inside, the hearing room smelled faintly of floor polish and paper. Rows of wooden benches faced the raised dais where the committee would sit. I took a seat at the front table, my papers stacked in a folder, compass tucked in my pocket. Serena and Denise sat 2 rows behind me, their presence a steadying weight. I could feel their eyes on my back like armor. The room filled slowly. Farmers with sun-cracked hands, shopkeepers in pressed shirts, women with babies on their hips. They came to witness a public hearing, but also to honor the man the county planned to celebrate at the bridge ceremony. Kerrigan arrived last, his posture straight, his hair silvered at the temples. He wore a suit, not a uniform, but the memory of medals clung to him like a shadow. The room shifted when he entered, the way people instinctively make space for someone used to command. He caught my eye and nodded, a small smile touching his lips. It was the smile of a man who once pulled me from rubble, who once saved my life. That memory burned hot and bitter inside me. Gratitude and anger fighting in the same breath. The chairman called the session to order. Voices hushed. My name was on the agenda, a simple line that said testimony from former warrant officer Mara Quinn. When they called me forward, my legs carried me steady, though my heart beat like a drum. I laid out the ledger, the FOIA pages, the invoices. I spoke slowly, the way Denise had coached. Dates first, then transfers, then the sequence that did not add up. I explained how donations flowed into Valor Steps, how money moved to Red Cedar, how invoices were generated before board approval. I did not accuse, I stated. The facts were enough. The committee members shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others frowning. The room behind me grew restless, whispers rising and falling like waves. I kept my voice calm, steady, each word a step across a fragile bridge. Then Kerrigan stood. He asked to respond. His voice smooth, practiced. He spoke of his decades of service, of the programs Valor Steps had funded, of the veterans whose lives had been eased. He acknowledged the tragedy of Tara's death, but framed it as the cost of service, the unpredictability of war. He looked at me directly when he said, and let us not forget, I once carried this soldier from a collapsed wall myself. She knows I would never risk the lives of those under my command. The room murmured approval. His words wrapped him in honor like a cloak. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Memory pulled me back to that night in the desert, the dust choking my lungs, his hand dragging me clear. Without him, I would not be here. Without him, I would not be able to speak these words at all. My throat tightened. The compass in my pocket pressed against my leg like a reminder. I glanced back. Serena's eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. She gave the smallest nod. A medic's reassurance before a soldier steps into fire. Denise leaned forward, her jaw firm, and whispered just loud enough for me to read her lips. The truth is the only badge you need. I drew in a breath. Gratitude does not erase guilt, I said. A life saved once does not grant the right to endanger others. Colonel Kerrigan did save me, that is true. But it is also true that these records show money moved in ways that cost lives, including Tara Mendel's. Both can be true, one does not cancel the other. The room fell quiet, even the murmurs stilled. I felt the weight of eyes, some angry, some uncertain, some newly questioning. The chairman asked if I had more evidence. I told him the documents were partial, that redactions hid much, but that sequence does not lie. If invoices were written before approval, then decisions were made outside proper channels. I urged the committee to request an independent audit to open the books fully. When I sat down, my legs trembled, but Serena's eyes caught mine again, and I steadied. The hearing moved on to other matters, but the air in the room had shifted. Kerrigan remained composed, but his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking. He leaned close to one of his allies on the committee, speaking low. After the session ended, townspeople filed past me, some offering polite nods, others looking away. A woman pressed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for saying what we all wondered." A man muttered that veterans should not be turned against each other. Truth divides before it heals. Outside, rain finally broke. Pattering on the courthouse steps. Serena pulled her hood up. Denise walked beside me like a guard. My chest ached with the weight of what had been said, but also with the relief of no longer carrying it in silence. Serena touched my arm before we parted. "Years ago, you dragged me out of a kill zone," she said. "Today, we dragged you through that room. That is how we keep each other alive." I smiled, a small, tired smile. Sisterhood is not always loud. Sometimes it is just being there, a steady presence in the row behind you. That night, alone in the house, I laid the penny beside the compass, the ledger, the blacked-out pages. Artifacts of a fight not yet finished. The rain tapped steady on the windows, a rhythm like a drum line. I whispered into the quiet, "Hold fast. Tomorrow we'll ask more of you." The morning after the hearing, I drove to Aunt Ruth's house. The rain had cleared, leaving the air cool and washed clean, but my chest still carried the storm. Ruth lived in a clapboard home on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon rolls and mothballs, where photographs lined every wall. She had been the treasurer of Valor Steps from its earliest days, and though she never sought attention, everyone in town knew her as reliable and decent. She opened the door before I knocked, as if she had been waiting. Her eyes looked weary, not just from age, but from a weight carried too long. She ushered me into the kitchen, poured tea into mugs, and sat across from me. "Mara," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank receipts, handwritten notes, and emails printed out on faded paper. My aunt had kept everything. As if her conscience refused to let her destroy it. "I never meant to hide anything," she whispered. "When Colonel Kerrigan asked me to sign off on transfers, I trusted him. He said it was temporary, just moving funds between accounts until paperwork caught up. He made it sound like helping veterans required speed, not red tape." Her hands shook as she lifted her mug. "I thought I was helping Mara. I thought I was serving the people who served us. But the more I saw, the more I knew it was wrong. And yet I kept signing." My throat tightened. "You trusted him," I said. "So did many of us. Trust is the first thing you give a commander." Tears welled in her eyes. I did not want to believe I was part of something corrupt. But when Tara died, I could not sleep. Every time I signed my name, it felt like ink turning into blood. She placed her hand over mine. "Please forgive me." I wanted to speak anger, to demand why she had not spoken sooner, but the sight of her frail shoulders bent under guilt softened me. Forgiveness was not easy, but truth sometimes breaks us before it heals us. I squeezed her hand. "What matters now is that you are willing to tell the truth out loud." She nodded, her lips pressed tight. Then she whispered, "I will testify if asked." When I left her house, I felt both heavier and lighter. Heavier with the knowledge that my own family had been entangled in Kerrigan's shadow. Lighter because silence had cracked. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. Word of the hearing spread quickly. Some townspeople looked at me differently now. At the grocery store, a clerk smiled with quiet gratitude. At church, one man refused to shake my hand. Truth fractures before it binds. I had to remind myself of that each time I felt the sting of disapproval. One afternoon, Serena and I sat in the diner with Denise. The television above the counter played a local news segment about the Valor Steps controversy. The anchor spoke of discrepancies in financial records, of concerns raised by former warrant officer Mara Quinn. The footage showed me carrying the folder into the hearing. My face looked older, sterner than I felt. The waitress set down pie in front of us, her eyes kind. "Not everyone will thank you," she said, "but some of us are glad someone is finally asking questions." Denise leaned back, arms folded. "The pressure will only grow," she warned. "Once the story leaves county lines, there is no pulling it back." Serena met my eyes, and maybe that is what it needs. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, the compass and penny beside the papers. The phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number from out of state. I hesitated, then answered. The voice on the line introduced himself as a coordinator from the Veterans Institute, a national organization that hosted conferences and hearings on issues facing service members. "We heard about your testimony," he said. "We believe your perspective could help shed light on accountability and procurement. Would you be willing to speak at our upcoming summit?" My stomach clenched. It was one thing to stand before a county committee, quite another to stand before veterans and officials from across the country. My silence had already cost me sleep. Speaking on that stage would cost me anonymity. But then I thought of Tara, of Luke, of Aunt Ruth's trembling hands, of the penny in the compass case. I thought of Serena and Denise sitting behind me like sentinels. The weight of silence had already been broken. Now the truth deserved air enough to breathe. I told him yes. The weeks that followed felt like walking a narrow bridge above a raging river. Rumors spread. Some accused me of dishonoring Kerrigan, of trying to tear down a man who had given his life to service. Others began to whisper questions of their own, piecing together memories of conversations. Noticing gaps in records, the fracture in the community widened. One Sunday after church, Luke approached me outside. People gave him space, unsure how to treat the son of a fallen soldier caught in the middle of scandal. He looked me in the eye and said, "My mom would have wanted you to keep going. Do not stop now." His words stayed with me as I prepared for the summit. Serena drilled me on medical analogies, turning ledgers into lifeblood, numbers into veins that showed where health was failing. Denise sharpened my testimony into clear lines, reminding me that a story is strongest when it cannot be bent out of shape. The night before I traveled, Aunt Ruth came by. She held my hands and whispered, "Speak for all of us who were too afraid." Her eyes shone with both shame and pride. When I boarded the plane, compass in my pocket, penny warm in my hand, I felt the weight of voices behind me. Tara's laughter, Luke's steady resolve, Serena's calm presence, Denise's firm guidance. Aunt Ruth's trembling confession. The bridge ceremony was still planned. Kerrigan's allies had not canceled it. But now, alongside that celebration, a national audience would hear another story, not of medals and parades, but of ledgers and lives, of silence breaking, of women who had once worn the uniform refusing to let the truth be buried. As the plane lifted, I looked out the window at the land below, patchwork fields stitched together. I whispered to myself the words that had carried me this far: "Hold fast, do not break. The truth is not mine alone. It belongs to all who lived it." The conference hall in Washington buzzed like a hive, its ceilings hung with flags and banners of every branch of service. I had been in many rooms of command, but never in one where the lights felt so sharp, so eager to expose. Cameras lined the back wall. Rows of suits, uniforms, and plain clothes filled the seats. This was no county hearing. This was a national stage, and I felt the chains of silence tugging hard, begging me to sit down and say nothing. Serena stood at my side, a calm anchor. She wore her dress blues, medals modest but polished. Denise flanked me on the other, her police badge tucked away, her presence solid as a guardrail. They had flown here with me, refusing to let me walk into this fire alone. The coordinator welcomed us, his voice echoing across the hall. He spoke of the need for accountability, of the importance of hearing from those who had worn the uniform and lived the consequences of policy. Then he called my name, former warrant officer Mara Quinn. I rose, smoothed the papers in my hand, and stepped to the podium. The compass was in my pocket, the penny inside its case. I felt both like a soldier and a child, carrying talismans against the unknown. I began with story, not accusation. I spoke of Tara Mendel, of the way she laughed even when dust coated our throats. I spoke of the night her armor plate failed, of the helmet liner Luke had carried to me, of the penny that marked both loss and promise. The room grew still, the cameras forgotten. Then I laid out the evidence, one piece at a time, the ledger with its careful entries, the FOIA pages with black bars that hid but could not erase dates, the invoices sent before approval, Aunt Ruth's testimony waiting to be given under oath. I spoke not as a lawyer, but as a soldier who had learned to follow lines of cause and effect, who knew when a chain of command had broken under its own weight. When I finished, I looked out at the rows of faces. Some nodded, some frowned, some scribbled notes, and in the front row sat two men in dark suits whose eyes did not move from me. Federal eyes. The moderator thanked me. He asked if I believed Colonel Kerrigan had acted with intent. I answered carefully. Intent is for investigators to determine. What I know is this: records were altered, money was moved, lives were lost, and silence has lasted too long. As I stepped back, the applause was uneven. Some clapped, some sat stone still. But I heard Serena's hands, Denise's hands, steady and sure, like the cadence of a drumbeat behind me. In the hall afterward, a swirl of people pressed close. Some shook my hand, some questioned my motives. One woman, a widow in her 60s, held me tight and whispered, "My husband died wearing faulty boots. No one ever listened. Thank you." We returned to the hotel that night, drained but unbroken. Serena poured tea. Denise sat with her notebook. They both looked at me as if waiting for me to speak. I admitted the truth. I am afraid of what this will do to the town, to Ruth, to Luke, afraid of standing in the light when I was trained to live in the shadows. Serena reached across the table, squeezed my hand. Fear means you know the stakes. Courage means you move anyway. Denise added, "The light is a trap only if you walk in alone. With us, it becomes a spotlight." The next day, the headlines began. Local hero under scrutiny, valor steps questioned. Some papers painted me as a traitor to the Brotherhood of Veterans. Others painted me as a whistleblower carrying the banner of truth. Both felt heavy. Back home, Kerrigan gave a statement to the press. He called me misguided, a soldier unable to separate grief from fact. He reminded them he had saved my life once. He spoke of honor, of duty, of the sacrifices of command. He looked every bit the hero they wanted him to be, but the cracks were showing. Reporters began to request access to Valor Steps records. The town grew more divided. Some wanted to cancel the bridge ceremony. Others doubled down, determined to raise Kerrigan higher in defiance of what they called outside interference. Late one evening, as Serena and Denise reviewed notes with me, my phone buzzed again. An email. This one not anonymous, a name I did not know. The subject line reads simply, "I tried to warn them." Inside was a message from Marla Voss, a former engineer at Red Cedar. She wrote that years earlier she had submitted reports on faulty armor plating, reports that were dismissed, delayed, and ultimately buried. She claimed Kerrigan himself had signed off on procurement despite warnings. She offered to meet in person to provide the originals. I sat back, heart racing. Proof in paper was one thing. Proof in a living witness was another. Serena read over my shoulder. This could be the missing link. Denise leaned forward, eyes sharp, or it could be a trap. We vet her. We do this carefully. I agreed. But deep inside, I felt something I had not felt in months. Hope. The chains were tightening, yes, but perhaps this was also the key. That night, I could not sleep. I walked the hotel hallway, compass in hand, penny warm in its case. The needle pointed north, steady as ever. I whispered to myself, "Hold fast. The storm is breaking." The message from Marla Voss lingered in my inbox like a flare burning against the night. I reread it over and over, searching for signs of deception. Her words were plain, unpolished, almost desperate. I tried to warn them. That was not the kind of line a manipulator used. It sounded like someone who had carried a stone in her chest for years and was finally too tired to hold it. Denise insisted we vet her. She ran checks through her old contacts. Sure enough, there was a record of a Marla Voss at Red Cedar, employed as a materials engineer from 2008 until 2012. She had no criminal record. She now lived in Maryland, not far from where the summit had been held. It all lined up. Still, we met her in a public place, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Serena sat beside me, Denise across, her eyes scanning every movement around us like she was back on patrol. Marla arrived 10 minutes late. She looked older than her 40 years, her hair streaked with gray, her shoulders hunched as if she had learned to expect resistance at every turn. She carried a folder clutched to her chest like a shield. She sat, her hands trembling as she unzipped the folder. Before she even spoke, tears filled her eyes. "I lost my job because I tried to stop this," she said. "I filed reports. I begged my supervisors. I told them the alloy mix was wrong, that the plates would fracture under certain impacts, and Kerrigan knew. He signed the final clearance." She slid documents across the table, technical reports stamped with dates showing repeated warnings, pages where her recommendations had been dismissed with notes that read budget concerns or not actionable, and at the bottom, signatures that authorized procurement anyway. My breath caught when I saw Kerrigan's name. It was there in black ink. Authorizing shipments despite the warnings. "Why now?" I asked softly, "after all these years?" She wiped her face with a napkin. "Because I read about you. I saw what you said at the Institute. I realized silence only protects him, and I cannot carry this anymore." Denise studied the documents, her expression grave. "These will matter," she said. "Combined with the ledger and the invoices, this is enough to spark investigation at the federal level." Marla's voice cracked. "Do you think they will listen this time?" Serena reached across, covering her hand. "They will, because you are not alone anymore." I nodded, my chest tight. For the first time, I felt the story growing larger than me, larger than Kerrigan, larger than Oak Ridge. It was no longer just a county's burden. It was a question for the nation. That evening, Denise made calls to contacts at the FBI. She did not give names, only hinted that credible evidence existed tying a decorated officer to procurement fraud with deadly consequences. 2 days later, men in dark suits knocked on my door. They introduced themselves. Badges glinting, they asked to see the documents. They asked to hear Marla's account. They asked to photograph the ledger, the invoices, the FOIA pages. Every word I spoke felt like a weight lifted and another weight added, the strange relief of truth and the dread of what it would cost. At one point, one of the agents leaned forward. "Did you ever personally see Colonel Kerrigan profit from these contracts?" "No," I admitted. "But the money trail shows funds moved through accounts tied to his associates. And Aunt Ruth is willing to testify she was asked to sign transfers she did not understand." The agent nodded slowly. Sometimes corruption does not wear a name tag. Sometimes it hides behind loyalty. When they left, Serena hugged me tight. Denise exhaled hard like she had been holding her breath for days. The room felt lighter. For the first time, I believed we might not carry this fight alone. News broke within the week. The FBI had opened a preliminary investigation into Valor Steps and its connections to Red Cedar procurement contracts. Cameras descended on Oak Ridge. Reporters knocked on doors, asked questions at diners, shoved microphones toward anyone who had worn a uniform. The town fractured further. Some stood behind me, behind Aunt Ruth, behind the truth. Others clung tighter to Kerrigan, insisting he was a victim of politics. Of vendettas, the bridge ceremony loomed, a gathering storm where the town's loyalty would be tested. One evening, I sat with Serena and Denise in my living room. The compass lay between us, the penny inside, the needle steady. We drank coffee from chipped mugs, the kind that had traveled with us through deployments and back again. Serena spoke softly. "Do you realize what we have done? We broke the silence." Denise added, "And now the system has to respond." That is more than most ever manage. I felt the truth of it, yet doubt still gnawed. What if the system bends back? What if Kerrigan still stands tall on that stage? Serena shook her head. "Then we stand taller." Marla called one night, her voice steadier than before. She said the FBI had already interviewed her. She had told them everything. She sounded relieved, like a woman who had finally laid down a burden. "Thank you," she told me, "for making me believe my voice mattered." When I hung up, I sat in the quiet. The storm outside rattled the windows. I held the compass and penny, whispering the words that had become my prayer: "Hold fast, do not break." The trap of light had turned into a spotlight, and within its glare chains were breaking. Not all at once, not cleanly, but link by link. And in the distance, the bridge still waited, its ceremony approaching, the final battlefield where truth and illusion would collide. The morning of the bridge ceremony dawned bright and cool, the kind of autumn day where the air carried both promise and finality. Maple leaves scattered across the town square like embers that had forgotten to burn. I stood before my mirror in the small rented house, buttoning the jacket of my simple navy dress. My compass rested in the pocket, the penny tucked inside its case, the weight against my chest steady as a heartbeat. Serena arrived first. She wore a dark suit. Her medals pinned discreetly, a quiet statement that she had earned her place in any room. Denise followed, dressed in uniform blues, though off-duty, her posture as straight as the oak trees that lined the square. They didn't speak right away. Instead, Serena rested her hand briefly on my shoulder, and Denise gave a nod that said everything words couldn't. We drove together, the streets lined with flags and banners. Families gathered with lawn chairs. Children held small American flags, their laughter mixing with the brass notes of a marching band warming up. It should have been a day of unclouded celebration. Instead, tension crackled beneath the cheer, an undercurrent only those who carried truth could hear. The new maple bridge arched across the river, its steel beams glinting in the sun. A stage had been erected at its entrance, rows of chairs set for officials, clergy, veterans, and townspeople. At the center stood the podium where Kerrigan was meant to accept the honor of having the bridge named after him. His name was already etched into the plaque, covered by a cloth waiting to be pulled away. We took our places near the front. The three of us stood together, not hidden, not loud, but present. People noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some smiled at me with quiet encouragement. Others looked away, their loyalty to Kerrigan too deeply tied to admit doubt. The ceremony began with prayer. A local pastor invoked blessings on the community, on the veterans who had served, on the bridge as a symbol of strength and unity. Then the mayor stepped forward, speaking of Kerrigan's service, his sacrifice, his leadership. Applause rose, but it felt thinner than I expected, some clapping with conviction, others with hesitation. Kerrigan walked to the podium with measured steps, his suit immaculate, his hair silver in the sunlight. He looked every bit the man the town had once revered. He spoke with practiced gravity, thanking the county, thanking the people, speaking of the bridge as a legacy not just of his own life, but of the sacrifices of all who wore the uniform. His words rang familiar, the cadence of a leader who knew how to inspire loyalty. But then movement stirred at the edge of the crowd. Two men in dark suits, badges visible, stepped forward. The murmur spread like wind through tall grass. One of them approached the stage, a folded document in hand. He waited until Kerrigan paused, then spoke quietly but firmly. The microphone caught only fragments. Investigation, federal order, appearance required. The air shifted. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the river's rush beneath the bridge. Kerrigan's face, once calm, tightened. His hand trembled as he accepted the paper. He looked out at the crowd, eyes searching, but found no refuge. I stood. Serena and Denise rose with me. We walked forward not to confront, but to bear witness. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady. When I reached the edge of the stage, I turned to the crowd. Townspeople, veterans, families, all watching with faces full of questions. I drew a breath and let my voice carry. Respect is not made of bronze, I said. It is not sealed in a plaque or carved in stone. Respect is measured in the bridges that do not break, the armor that holds when bullets strike. The lives preserved because we held ourselves accountable. I felt Serena's hand touch my shoulder, Denise's steady palm at my back. Their strength flowed into me, a ritual of silent transfer, the way we used to pass water canteens in desert heat. This bridge, I continued, will stand longer than any of us. Let it stand for truth. Let it stand for the courage to face what is hard to admit. Let it stand for every soldier whose silence was broken too late. The crowd shifted, quiet still, but eyes softened. Some lowered their heads, some nodded, tears glinting. Serena leaned close, her whisper only for me. We kept this bridge standing. Denise added, low and firm, and we will hold it for those who come after. The FBI agents guided Kerrigan down the steps, papers still in his hand. He walked stiffly, pride clinging to him like a cloak, even as it frayed. For a moment, our eyes met. In his gaze, I saw not just defiance, but something closer to sorrow, the look of a man who once did noble things and then lost himself in shadows. He broke the silence between us with a single line, spoken soft enough only I could hear. I saved you once. I answered with the truth I had carried for months, and I will never forget that, but saving one life does not excuse risking so many. He looked away, the agents moving him into the crowd. I turned back to the community. We are not here to bury the past, I said. We are here to honor the lives that deserve remembering, to protect those who serve tomorrow. This bridge will not break because we will not break. Applause rose then, not thunderous, not unanimous, but steady. The kind that builds like rain on a roof, gathering until it becomes a storm. Behind me, the cloth was pulled from the plaque. Kerrigan's name was no longer there. Instead, etched in bronze were the words Maple Bridge, dedicated to the veterans of Oak Ridge County, especially the fallen. Tara's name appeared among them. Luke stood in the front row, tears shining on his face. He pressed his hand over his heart, then lifted it toward me. In that moment, the chains I had carried loosened. Silence had broken. The truth had walked into light, and the bridge stood unshaken. The ceremony ended not with brass bands or fireworks, but with a hush that felt almost sacred. People drifted away from the stage in small groups, voices low, as if they were leaving a church service. I stood for a moment longer, my hands resting on the cool railing of the Maple Bridge, watching the river curl beneath. The water rushed strong and unbroken, carrying autumn leaves towards somewhere unseen. Serena and Denise stayed close, their presence a shield even in silence. Luke approached from the crowd, his face wet but not from rain. He looked at me, then at the plaque where his mother's name now lived in bronze. His voice cracked as he whispered, she would have loved this bridge, not because it is steel, but because it carries people safely across. I pressed the penny back into his palm. I think she wanted you to carry this now. He closed his fingers around it, his shoulders shaking, and nodded. We walked together off the stage. Aunt Ruth waited near the benches, her frail frame trembling, a handkerchief crumpled in her fist. When I reached her, she gripped me with surprising strength. Forgive me, Mara, she whispered again. I pulled her into my arms. You already asked, and I already gave it. What matters is you spoke when it was hardest. That is all any of us can do. We left the square as the crowd thinned, walking back toward town. Denise offered to drive us all to my place. No one argued. The sun was lowering, painting the sky with bands of gold and lavender. It felt like the kind of evening soldiers remember years later, not for the battle, but for the calm that follows. At the house, we gathered in the living room, cups of coffee warming our hands. Serena curled her feet under her on the couch. Luke sat in the old armchair that had belonged to my mother, and Aunt Ruth settled at the table, her hands folded as if in prayer. Denise leaned against the doorway. Her posture loose now, no longer the rigid stance of a guard, but the quiet ease of a friend. I looked around the room and felt the layers of connection. Blood family, chosen family, the kind built in foxholes and hospital wards and years of silence broken only by trust, a sisterhood and a brotherhood woven together by loss and courage. Luke spoke first. Do you think they will still name things after him? I shook my head. Maybe not, maybe yes. History is stubborn. But names are not what last. Bridges, families, lives, those are what endure. Serena smiled faintly. You know what I saw today? Not a town divided. I saw a town learning to open its eyes. That is harder than clapping for medals. Denise lifted her mug, and I saw 3 women standing on a stage, steady as stone, reminding everyone that truth can walk in boots. Aunt Ruth's eyes glistened, and I saw my niece carry the weight I could not. For that I am grateful. The room grew quiet again, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the kind of quiet that settles when words have done their work and hearts need a moment to rest. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone with the compass in my hand. I opened its case, the needle steady, the penny gone now to Luke. For months, I had carried it as a promise. Tonight, I carried something else, peace. I thought of Kerrigan, of the look in his eyes when the agents handed him the summons. He was not only a villain, he was a man who had once saved me, who had once commanded loyalty, who had then lost himself in choices that betrayed the very soldiers he claimed to protect. His downfall was not mine to celebrate. It was mine to witness, to ensure it did not bury the truth along with it. The phone buzzed with messages, some from strangers who had seen the news, veterans from far away who wrote simply, "Thank you," some from neighbors who admitted they had doubted but now understood. One from Marla Voss saying they listened. They really listened. I closed my eyes, letting those words settle into the cracks of my spirit. For so long, I had feared my voice was too small, my evidence too fragile, my story too heavy. Tonight, I knew better. One voice is rarely alone. It echoes, finds others, becomes a chorus. The next morning, Serena and Denise returned. We walked across the Maple Bridge together, the plaque gleaming in the sunlight. Cars passed, families strolled. Children leaned over the railing to watch the water. Life was already flowing across the steel we had fought to protect. Serena touched the plaque softly. "We kept this one standing," she whispered. Denise nodded, "and we will keep the next." I laid my hand beside theirs, not for our glory, but for Tara, for every name carved in stone, for every soldier still out there wearing armor they pray will hold. We walked to the middle of the bridge and stood for a long while. Letting the river's roar fill the silence, I thought of the words I had spoken at the ceremony. Respect is not made of bronze. Respect is the bridge that does not break. Today, that truth lived not just in my voice, but in the steel beneath our feet, in the hands that had held me steady, in the lives that would cross this span tomorrow without ever knowing the story carved into its beams. When we turned back toward town, I felt the weight on my chest ease. Not gone, never gone, but shared, and shared weight is bearable. As night fell again, I sat on the porch, pen in hand, writing in a notebook. Not for evidence, not for courts, for myself, for memory, for healing. I wrote the names of my sisters in arms. Serena Lopez, Denise Carter, Tara Mendel, and I wrote my own, not because I needed to see it, but because I needed to remind myself I was part of them, not alone, never again alone. I closed the notebook and whispered into the dark words that had carried me through every chapter of this journey. Hold fast, do not break. And when you cannot stand, let your sisters hold you. That is how bridges endure. The night after the ceremony, I sat alone on my porch, the air cool with the scent of cut grass and river water drifting up from the valley. The town had gone quiet. Children had been tucked into bed, shop windows dark, only the steady hum of crickets and the soft creak of the porch swing breaking the silence. I held the compass in my hands, its needle pointing north, steady and unshaken. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady too. What happened on that bridge was not just my story. It was the story of every soldier who has carried the weight of truth when silence felt safer. It was the story of every family who wondered if their sacrifice mattered. And it was the story of every sister and brother in arms who has held another upright when the world threatened to push them down. I used to think justice was a lonely path, that if you wanted the truth to be heard, you had to stand alone in the storm and take the lightning on your own shoulders. But I was wrong. Justice is not built in solitude. It is built in community. It is held together by people who refuse to let go of one another. It is a bridge kept from breaking not because one person stood tall, but because many hands braced the beams. Serena and Denise reminded me of that. Luke reminded me of that. Even my Aunt Ruth, with her trembling confession, reminded me that healing requires honesty and courage, even when it comes late. None of us can hold the weight of memory or truth alone. We are meant to share it, to carry it together. That is how bridges endure storms. That is how people endure grief. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the soil where truth takes root. And when the moment comes, when that truth finally breaks the surface, you will not be standing alone. Somewhere, someone will be there to steady you. And you may discover that the very people you thought you had lost are standing with you in ways you never imagined. So tonight, as this story closes, I leave you with a question that I hope you will carry into the comments below. Who is the sister or brother who has stood beside you through the hardest season of your life? Who is the one who kept your bridge from breaking? Share their name or share their story. Because stories like these remind us that we are never as alone as we fear. Before you go, if courage and resilience matter to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Military Revenge. Share it with someone who may need the reminder that strength is not always loud and justice is not always quick, but both are possible when we hold each other steady. Because in the end, what keeps us standing is not medals or plaques or bronze. What keeps us standing are the bridges we build between each other and the hands that refuse to let us fall.